Alright, welcome to Unit 6 review for A Push. We're getting to probably the hard stuff because it's like heavy, like Unit 7 and 8, which are also heavy and are very likely to be on the exam. Alright, so before we get started, I organized the review session as a member of Five Hive. If you don't know who we are, I hope you guys do, but if you don't, we are a group of volunteers who are taking time to help you guys out to improve your chances of getting a better score on the AP exam. And if you do want to join us, if you want to become a volunteer for this, feel free to apply. It's on a rolling basis. Yes, here's his feedback here. Here's the feedback link and the QR code. I'll leave these up for a little bit. And this will come back, by the way, at the end of the lecture, so don't worry if you don't get your hands on it. All right. Of course, your complimentary disclaimer. College Board is not affiliated with us and doesn't endorse us because we're independent from College Board. So, yeah. Again, as per usual, your expectations, be respectful, please. No silly stuff, as in don't violate the rules of Discord's TOS in the chat. If you're wondering why I specifically said that, don't ask. Please be engaged as possible. Try to do all the activities. Again, if I don't see your question, please ask it when I come around to check the chat because, well, I'm on this slide presentation and I can't see your question immediately. So if I haven't gone around to it, just repost it. And of course, the lecture is always going to be recorded. So don't feel bad if you have to leave in the middle. I'm fine with that. So our agenda for today for Unit 6 is we're going to tackle pretty much half of the Unit 6 stuff. We're going to talk about expansion and then the rise of capitalism. And then we're going to stop there at labor. And then we'll continue on from that tomorrow. All right. So 6.2, westward expansion. And let's talk about the economics of this. What's going on as we're going out to the west? Well, you're going to see the rise of agricultural markets. Basically, what an agricultural market is going to be kind of similar to cash crops in some ways. The purpose of agricultural markets and being a farmer in those kinds of industries is to harvest crops, sell out to other markets, whether or not it's across the country or just outside of the country. Big deal is that it's not self-sufficient. So you're basically cultivating crops and you're selling them to make money, and you're using that money to afford other stuff. Now, agricultural markets will become more viable with the rise of mechanization. We see the rise of barbed wire that we can finally produce. We see the rise of tractors, which is like the combined reaper harvester thing. All three of those are going to help make farming more efficient. It's going to be more productive. And so more farmers are going to be likely to take on that job because it's easier to harvest. In addition, railroads will play a role in building these agricultural markets, making them more viable by, letting farmers actually transport their stuff to other places quite easily. However, farmers did have to rely on these railroads, and sometimes these prices that they sold the crops for, they were quite volatile. They were subject to change. In addition, we had corporate monopolies, and we'll get to that later, much later, when we talk about industrial capitalism. But just know that monopolies, specifically railroad monopolies, were there to make profits at the expense of farmers. And so what farmers are going to do is they're going to build organizations. The first organization you will see will be the Grange in 1867. That's when they start their thing. But later on, the Grange is going to kind of, I don't want to say it's going to be incorporated into the Farmers Alliance. That isn't necessarily true, But we will see the rise of the Farmers Alliance in the 70s, 1870s, which is going to be much bigger than the Grange. And if you guys remember about the politics of the Gilded Age, that's going to lead to populism in the 90s. Yay! Okay, so what did the Grange of the Farmers Alliance support, though? They were in favor of railroad regulations. Why? Well, these railroads were kind of going out of control, making shipping costs really, really high. In fact, they were actually so high that it was rather beneficial to burn your crops as fuel than actually sell them, which was a bad sign. Another thing that the Grange of the Farmers Alliance are going to support is cooperative buying. Basically, benefits that benefits mainly farmers in the context of buying equipment, buying fertilizer, and all that. That's the volatile prices I was talking about. And finally, they also believe that the federal government should give loans out to these farmers as a way of, mutually benefiting from the economic development that these farmers were contributing to. Of course, the rallying cry of the Grange was basically, we're farmers, we make food, you guys need food to live, we hope. And we feed you all, so you guys should also be supporting us so that you guys can keep on doing your own stuff. Now, a key caveat with these farming organizations that, well, they're going to be segregated. So we will see the rise of the Colored Farmers Alliance. So basically, we got 3 farmers organizations. These are the only ones that College Board really mentions explicitly. But they all support the same kind of things. They want to make sure that farmers are better off. As a whole. Now, for Western communities, during this entire whole period, when we see the rise of agricultural markets, we also see the rise of just towns and cities in the West as a whole, finally reaching the West Coast. So let's talk about how these communities will kind of form. I already mentioned railroads. Railroads will expand industries. Again, I mentioned that they make any industry viable by, transporting between them, much like airlines make a lot of industries viable. In addition, specifically, they will see refrigerated railroad cars, basically these little cars that are able to bring food around, like actual food. Cool, that helps farmers. They were also they took a key role in cattle drives. Basically, what these were was basically ranchers would go out to bring these cattle to railroads, and they would transport those cattle to any kind of, center for meat processing. So that's beneficial, right? Beneficial for ranches and makes ranches viable. In addition, the government will have a role. How? The Pacific Railroad Acts, passed in 1862, will help railroads by providing land grants and subsidies to railroad companies. In addition, they will pass the Homestead Acts. The first one was passed during Lincoln's era. And basically what they'll do is they'll help give more land out for private ownership for people who we'll call homesteaders. And we'll talk about that soon. For more people, and what these people could do, well, pretty much anything. Self-sufficient farming, ranching, farm, and just like agricultural markets. Sometimes mining, not exactly. Speaking of mining as well, we will see the rise of raw minerals, raw resources in the West. And well, that's going to attract a lot of people and is going to build a lot of communities because people want to stay closer to those minerals. So gold rush is a good example in the 1848. Yes, gold rush in 1848 in California, as well as silver in the Comstock Lode in Nevada in 1858. Most of these communities involving minerals will actually just be called boom towns. And eventually, over time, they're going to become deserted. They'll become ghost towns. But, aside from that, we will see hub cities like Chicago. And what these hub cities are basically little centers for distribution that railroads would stop at, and all that. And a lot of these hub cities will grow very, very quickly. Of course, you guys know that Chicago is a very huge city in America right now. Part of that reason is because of the railroads. So yeah. Now let's move on briskly to social and cultural implications of westward expansion. So I mentioned homesteaders. Basically, internal migrations will involve a lot of white settlers kind of getting access to land that I mentioned via the Homestead Acts, purchasing land at a cheaper rate from the federal government. In addition, we're going to see exodusters, basically kind of the first major internal migration of African Americans. And most of them are going to go on down there to Kansas. They're going to found really sizable communities such as Nicodemus, which, yes, it's a reference to the Exodus, by the way, in Kansas. The primary reasons for these exodusters to leave the South is, well, we talked about how not great the South was for African Americans. We had we're going to see the rise of Jim Crow, which will be in 6.4, by the way. The failure of Reconstruction, kind of the collapse of African American political participation at the hands of the KKK. So, with all that said, and also poverty, it'd be very natural to see that African Americans will move out west in hopes of better conditions. But at the same time, these exodusters, while they form their own communities, they are not going to, strike it rich per se. They are going to still face discrimination. In fact, they will face quite a horrible race massacre in Tulsa in the next period, Unit 7. So there's that. You also should know about ethnic groups, what westward expansion entailed for them. And Native Americans is their own section because, a lot of history with the Native Americans breaks out in this unit. But the two other groups I want to talk about are Chinese immigrants and Mexican Americans. So, why do I want to talk about Chinese immigrants? Well, they mainly came here for better economic conditions. They wanted stable finances and all that. Part of their participation as laborers would be on the railroad, in farms, in mining, etc. Now, these immigrants are going to face heavy discrimination, and eventually, we're going to see a whole lot of nativist sentiments, which we'll discuss in further detail in 6.8 to 6.9. But do know that discrimination is going to be a key factor in treating ethnic groups, because Mexican Americans are going to experience the same thing. Even though they are going to achieve citizenship per the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, they mainly work in low-paying jobs like peons or vaqueros. If you don't know what vaqueros are, they are basically cowboys who worked on these cattle drives. Again, these Mexican Americans are going to face discrimination in voting and property rights and all that. They will respond to this by forming Las Gorras Blancas. Basically, this group of Mexican Americans are going to tell white settlers to leave them alone, whether through violent means or just politics. Eventually, they'll stop the whole violent stuff and they will turn to politics. They will continue fighting the kind of discrimination. And when I speak of discrimination, I mean things that basically were aimed at suppressing their culture and stuff like that. For example, the Sunday laws, which would prohibit any kind of activities and festivities Mexican Americans were commonly doing at the time. Greaser laws were a similar thing, basically a vagrancy law. A key policy of vagrancy laws. But those two are not the most important things you have to remember off the top of your mind. It's the Native Americans. So let's talk about it. Initially, Native Americans were, everywhere in throughout America, obviously. Now, over through a key set of key policies such as Indian Removal Act in 1830, right? And the Trail of Tears, moving them to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. We also see the Indian Appropriations Act in 1851, which will essentially set up reservation systems. These are going to stuff Native American tribes into these reservations, which will be federal land. However, regardless of the reservation system, violence happened still. These conflicts will mainly arise from violated treaties and violated sovereignty. Naturally, Native Americans will want to defend, their own existence. Um, so, one of these conflicts that College Board wants you to know, part of the American Indian Wars, is the Seal Wars, which were a series of wars that first broke out in 1854 and officially ended in 1891. For the most part, these broke out for a variety of reasons, maybe due to a massacre, maybe due to a violation of a treaty. Specifically, most notably, the Treaty of Fort Laramie, the one signed in 1868, was violated at some point very early on after its signature. And that will lead to another war between the Sioux and the U.S. government. Now, in response to these conflicts, not only do we see the rise of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but we will see the Dawes Act, which was signed in 1887. Now, the aim of the Dawes Act was to, hey, let's not do this reservation thing, and it's just to, and thing is, I really don't like the Dawes Act. What the Dawes Act is it will repeal the reservation system. It's going to follow a system of land allotments. Basically, in other words, they wanted to force Native Americans to give up this idea that the land is for everyone and to assert the idea that there is such a thing as private property. Now, obviously, these Native Americans will resist this kind of idea of assimilationist idea, and this will lead to more white settlers getting their land. It basically just destroyed Indian land. Not great. I mentioned assimilation. You should know ways that Native Americans try to resist assimilation. By the way, I should mention what assimilation. Not only did they want to force Native Americans to give up their kind of traditions and all that, they Americans will establish actual boarding schools such as the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which will take Native children and they're going to educate them in Western ways. Basically, stop speaking Navajo or whatever, and start speaking English. Cut your hair, dress up like a Westerner. And here I included an example of kind of this idea from the Carlisle School. Basically, is a picture of Chief Red Cloud here. Actually, Red Cloud resisted assimilation. He was actually one of the key chiefs, one of the chiefs who succeeded against repelling American forces. Known as Red Cloud's War. You don't need to know that, but do know that that there's a caveat with his photo. Anyways, how did Native Americans resist assimilation? Well, Ghost Dance Movement. What the Ghost Dance Movement was all about is basically Native Americans would hope for, will believe in this idea that Americans are gonna go away and that we're gonna see the return of kind of their traditional lifestyle, the return of the overhunted bison and buffalo, and other Native American leaders such as Sitting Bull and Red Cloud are going to appeal to the American public in via speeches primarily, or as well as the federal government, in order to maintain their sovereignty. Now, the Ghost Dance Movement is going to be met with violence, not on their part, but on the Americans' part, because of course the Americans started the violence. Specifically, the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890 is going to suppress kind of even more the Lakota, which is a part of the Sioux culture, at the Pine Reeves Reservation. Most of these guys were wounded, were part of the Ghost Dance Movement. In fact, Sitting Bull himself was actually killed by police officers for the Ghost Dance Movement. The Wounded Knee Massacre will pretty much signal the end of American Indian Wars and all the resistance that Native Americans will put up. Now, that isn't to mean that that we will see the end of Native Americans. No. We'll see them make a comeback in the Civil Rights Movement, which is going to be in Unit 8, unfortunately. So there's that. I do want to make a key note about Native Americans in this time period. Before pre-Columbian interactions, there was an estimate between 2 to 18 million Native Americans in America. By 1900, which is basically the end of this period, there will only be 237,000 Native Americans left. Which really shows you how much of a crappy treatment Native Americans got. Their children were often subjected to horrible conditions, which would lead to their deaths. Canada, Canada also does this too. By the way, they're not free of any guilt. So there's that about westward expansion. Any questions about that? Oh yeah. Don't worry about the last lecture. Key takeaways you should know. Kind of how the rise of agricultural markets happen. The railroads. You gotta know the railroads, guys. As well as knowing how Native Americans were treated in this era. Seems like no one has any questions, so let's move on to an MCQ. So, which of the following best explains the impact cultural assimilation had on Native Americans? I don't know why they deleted the had there. A. Assimilation often led to bloody wars and massacres between white Americans and Native Americans. B. Assimilation dismantled the reservation system, leaving Native Americans to their own vices among white settlers. C. Assimilation totally destroyed Native American traditions and cultures, leading to the decimation of the Native American population. And D. Assimilation split up Native American families and subjected natives to oppressive and poor socioeconomic conditions. Make your best guess, because this is a question that I will use to clarify something about Native Americans. So don't worry if you get it right or wrong. I'm seeing some responses. If you guys can do it by 5:23, that would be awesome, because MCQs are usually like one MCQ per minute. Looks like a good chunk of you are saying D. Some of you are also saying C. Anyone else have their 2 cents? Any ideas from anyone else? All right. So, someone who picked D, would you like to explain why you picked D? Seems like I don't need to clarify this a whole lot. I thought of boarding schools splitting up and then just the general treatment for the second part of the answer. Okay. Yeah, boarding schools will split up families. I did briefly mention that they are literally going to rip out native children away from families. Cause yeah, that's something the American government did. As for the second clause, you just thought of the general treatment, oppressive and poor socioeconomic conditions. So someone who picked C, would you like to give your own explanation why you picked C? D seemed too obvious of an answer. Okay. You thought of the main goal, assimilation, was to wipe out original culture of Native Americans and convert them to be more like white Americans in every aspect. That isn't wrong. So the right answer is D. Let me explain why it's not necessarily C. Totally is an absolute there. And also the second clause, decimation of the Native American population. Now, the totally will apply to that decimation. That's the issue. Not every Native American was, not a Native American is going to take in this assimilationist idea. And for the most part, Native American traditions will survive through assimilation. A key example is a bunch of Native Americans, revitalization, Native American revitalization, um, which is a thing that's going on today. So that is a key counter argument for that. Now, for D, yes, boarding schools involved with Native families. That clause is true. The other thing about oppressive and poor socioeconomic conditions is with the Dawes Act. Basically, they made Native Americans landless, and any Native Americans that did take up the offer to take up the land and work on it were subjected to poor conditions because of discrimination. They would not benefit from this. They did not earn a lot of money. They remained in poverty, which is one of the key issues why Native American societies and tribes today still face poverty. Are there any questions about this? When did the boarding schools end? Um, that's a good question. Um, Regarding America, I believe the last boarding school, oh shoot. When was Carlisle closed? I have to remember this. Let's see. The Carlisle school, I don't quite remember. Let me check. Let me check because I don't want to give you the wrong information. Um, oh, 1918. Carlisle School will end in 1918. I don't remember when the last Indian boarding school will end, but it should be the 20th century, early 20th century in that area, period of history. As for Canada, I don't really remember when Canada's last boarding school will close down. The good majority will certainly be, the majority of them will be closed by the turn of the century. And when I say turn of the century, I mean the turn of the century went here right now. But do know that just the fact that these boarding schools were, a thing about assimilation, and they did have some effect on Native Americans is the key thing. All right, let's move on to the South. Ugh. Anyways, let's talk about this idea of the New South. What was it? Well, it had to do with the economy. And the New South was coined by some guy named Henry Grady. Basically, the key idea behind the New South was that the South, being poor, facing literal destruction from the Civil War, over reliance on a plantation economy, should adopt kind of an industrial, an industrial economy like the North did. This is going on at the same time as the Second Industrial Revolution in America. We will see some attempts at this. For example, we will see the rise of the tobacco market under the American Tobacco Company in 1890, which was founded in North Carolina. We will see the rise of iron and steel manufacturing in here. We will see the rise of mining industry, furniture production, heck, even textile mills, which was, the original, the OG factory kind of thing that was going on in the North during the Market Revolution. However, with these attempts, only landlords and factory owners would benefit from this, which is to say, essentially another planter aristocracy. As well, and this is because, well, they reap the money, as well as having much lower wages for workers than anywhere else in the North. So, economic inequality, first time that shows up. We're going to talk about it even more when we talk about labor. However, the New South, not a big thing. Why? The majority of the economy in the South remain to be agrarian. And the majority of the South will remain poor. How? Well, we're going to adopt sharecropping and tenancy farming in the South. I already discussed sharecropping, but if you forget, the landlord will supply capital. They will supply the land, the equipment, all the crops. Now, the sharecropper, they're the ones doing the hard work. They get to, work on this land. But part of it is also, part of their kind of payment to the landlord is, well, the crops they make. So, you can imagine why landlords remain rich and the sharecroppers didn't. This system was just another way of, sidestepping the whole slavery bit in the 13th Amendment. In addition, we will see tenant farming. Basically, tenant farming is similar to sharecropping. But the landlord will only supply the land. The tenant will supply the labor, and they are responsible for the equipment required for the labor. Now, sharecropping is going to be far more common than tenancy farming, because, well, it's quintessential of the New South, as well as the fact that, well, more of these sharecroppers and these tenants are going to be more attracted to the idea of sharecropping, relatively speaking, by the way. But let me explain why these sharecroppers and tenants remained poor in full detail. Low prices. There were low prices of these crops. Why? Because there were a lot of people doing it, as well as price fluctuations, but they remained pretty low. This would lead to a kind of cycle of debt for sharecroppers, which we call debt peonage. And because of that cycle of debt, they are going to be in eternal poverty. This poverty is going to be one of the pushes for African Americans in the South to move on down to Kansas and Nebraska and that area as exodusters, as well as the Great Migration, which we will talk about later in Unit 7. Now, another thing about the New South is we will see the rise of Jim Crow. Jim Crow was foreshadowed by the Black Codes, but let's talk about Jim Crow. Jim Crow will establish segregation in every walks of life: housing, jobs, education, drinking water. Yes, I said drinking water. Going to the bathroom, public parks, riding buses. You get the idea. In every facet of life, Jim Crow separated African Americans from white Southerners. And the federal government will do something about it, just in the wrong direction. Through the Plessy v. Ferguson case in 1896, they are going to establish the separate but equal doctrine. This will uphold Jim Crow segregation. Now, during the Jim Crow era, which I also tend to call the nadir sometimes, there will be violence and massacres, both perpetuated just by the KKK, but just straight up discontent white Southerners. For example, in 1898, we are going to straight up see a coup in Wilmington, North Carolina, I think. Yes, North Carolina, Wilmington. This was a straight up overthrow of a local government that was perpetuated by the red shirts, aka angry, racist white Southerners. Another example of these massacres is the Thibodaux massacre in Louisiana in 1887. Again, key thing, lots of violence. Now, we won't reach the Red Summer period, which is a whole lot of lynchings and a whole lot of race riots, because that's in Unit 7. We will discuss that in Unit 7 because it's in that period. But do know that we will see the rise of straight up violence against African Americans throughout. Now, in response to Jim Crow and this violence, African Americans are not just going to say, okay, we'll just be, mannequins for this. We're going to see a lot of reformers, a lot of people pushing for equality from the African American community. Specifically, we're going to see Booker T. Washington, if you guys know who that is, hopefully you do, and his Atlanta Compromise in 1895, which is his speech. Basically, he is going to provide this idea that African Americans are going to adopt a more industrial outlook. They're going to focus on practical jobs as a way to placate the South in some ways, to prove to the South that they were valuable people, so they shouldn't kill them because you need labor. So yeah, and that will lead to the rise of various industrial schools in the South. Another leader will be W.E. Du Bois, who will emphasize education, kind of a liberal arts education for a variety of reasons. I won't get into those reasons because that's more of an African American studies topic. College Board doesn't really expect you to know this for APUSH. Another reformer will include Ida B. Wells, who was also a muckraker. Basically, her writings and her publications will continuously bring lynchings and these acts of violence straight to the public eye. And if you guys know anything about publications, they're very important in persuading the American public, i.e. the abolitionist newspapers and publications. Any questions about the Southern side of things here? No? Actually. I did pull a picture from 1939, but how would they perceive a person of color that isn't black, like a Mexican American? Because they weren't considered like white either. I guess like Chinese. Well, we don't see huge Chinese communities in the South. The other kind of person of color, sort of, that would appear in the South, kind of communities would be Mexican Americans in Texas. For that specific thing, I would suppose that it was mainly similar kind of segregationist idea. Mainly because, this is, by the way, inference. I have to go look it up. But this is an inference I make because, well, these Southerners always adopted the idea of white supremacy. So that would also mean, whites are superior to Mexican Americans and all that. Chinese Exclusion Act will be passed in 1882. At least the infamous one that effectively banned Chinese Americans. We will see the total ban of Chinese immigrants later on. It will get worse in the 1920s, and we will talk about that in Unit 7. But we will talk a little bit more about immigration tomorrow, because that's 6.8, and we're stopping at 6.7. Good question, by the way, about people who weren't black but also lived in the South. Any other questions? All right. Yeah, I do want to mention this is called the Gilded Age because this is a term coined by Mark Twain. Basically, the idea is, there's this illusion of prosperity, but it's like gilded. It's like fake gold. That's the idea of the Gilded Age thing. The reason why he brings that up, well, we'll talk more about it. Why this is not a great era to live in. That's why it's my favorite period, because I get to smack talk a lot of U.S. history. Okay. Let's move on to technological innovation. This is actually kind of vague, and I hate College Board for this topic. So I'm going to try my best to make it kind of clear and in-depth. It's very vague. So, let's talk about electricity. What is electricity? Hopefully you guys know it because it's the thing that supplies your lights. Why is it important, though? What makes electricity important? Its applications are important. The light bulbs. their involvement in, production. Um, that's primarily the key idea behind electricity, is that it's going to make production a little bit more efficient. No longer do you have to rely on any kinds of torches and, um, things like that, like torches, things that you have to like manually light up. This made long hours of work even more viable, but also it would be brought to a lot of houses. Again, the idea of no longer having to rely on manual like ways of getting light to exist um, will be convenient for a lot of people, including business people. Building big cities will be even more viable through in this period of time. We'll see the rise of the Bessemer process, which comes from the Industrial Revolution in Europe. In America is the Second Industrial Revolution. The Bessemer process will basically make construction far more easier and cheaper. We will also see, hilariously enough, the rise of elevators. I don't know why this is an important thing to mention, other than the fact that, hey, let's build some huge skyscrapers, such as the home insurance building in Chicago, which was demolished, by the way. But the key idea is the construction of cities is going to be made easier. Large buildings are going to be easier to build as well. So we will see huge urban centers in this era. I'm going to talk about that a little bit again. You also see the rise of automobiles, first patented by Benz, I believe that's the name. Hopefully you guys know the impact of automobiles being able to move around the city quite easily. Moving around the country as well would be easier than just wagons or paying for a railroad that would sometimes be expensive. Of course, automobiles aren't going to be commercialized until Unit 7, but this is the beginning of that kind of transportation movement. In addition, businesses, facilitating business is going to be easier. That's what I mean by improving business. How? Typewriters. You can type stuff quicker now. You don't have to manually write them and read horrible handwriting of the era. There's also tin cans. Yes, tin cans are going to be important in the way that they preserve food better. You're going to see the adding machine, which will make arithmetic no longer a nightmare for businesses. Basically, an adding machine is another term for calculators. So yes, the calculator is going to be very important. I'm sure the calculator is important for your lives now. And finally, communications. We see the rise of the telephone from Alexander Graham Bell from the UK. We will see the rise of the phonograph, which is by Thomas Edison. It will be improved by not Thomas Edison, by the way. People give him too much credit. Key thing with communications is it'll be easier to facilitate businesses as well, but it will also kind of develop a national economy. Kind of connects the entire country in many ways. I forgot to mention the telegraph will also be one of these innovations leading up to that. Hopefully this is a straightforward one, but before I move on to the SAQ, any questions on this? I think we do have an SAQ next. All right, let's move on. You are given 15 minutes. Please respond to all the following parts. If it says describe, explain clearly. So briefly describe one economic development from 1865 to 1900. Briefly describe one technological development from 1865 to 1900. Briefly explain one similarity or difference in how two groups responded to economic change from 1865 to 1900. And briefly explain how the government was involved in another economic development from 1865 to 1900. All right, your 15 minutes. We're going to regroup back at 6. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask. So far, anyone has any questions? Is the SAQ going well? We are approaching the 10 minutes left, so hopefully you are done with the first two parts. But you should be done with the first part. We are now at the 10-minute mark, so oh. Sorry, I just saw an interesting that happened with my screen for a sec. I don't think the screen record captured that. You're around halfway through. Hopefully, you guys are almost done with part C. We're thinking about part D now. Almost 5 minutes left. How are we looking on this SAQ? Where are we at? Not good. I read each of your responses. Oh, Rima's done. Currently burning the kitchen. I don't have a rubric. I just read through your responses and give my own feedback. Um, there is there's better ways of doing this, evaluating your SAQ skills and all that. Thing is, it's kind of too late in the into AP season to kind of implement that. So for next year, which is the year you guys are not taking a push, I'll probably be implementing that. You got yours on paper. That's all right. You don't have to post a picture of it if you can't figure it out. We have 2 minutes left. Start posting things. Start posting your responses. The more you give me, the more feedback I can give you. So You know what? Me too. Push through for a push. One minute left. Lock in for a push, guys. Okay. All right. It's 6 o'clock. Post your responses. I'm gonna look through Leo's first because they did theirs on paper. So general ideas: monopolies. Depends on if you described it well. Yes. Technological railroads. Mm-hmm. C. North industrialization versus South agricultural. You'd have to explain clearly how this is an example of responses, difference in responses to economic change. Um, so I'm not quite sure. Again, you're not giving me a whole lot, so I can't make a good evaluation of your response. Um, Once again, if you don't feel like typing the entire thing, that's okay. It's just that the downside to that is I can't give you detailed feedback. Um, Part D, you said the U.S. government provided land grants for railroads. Um, okay. I'm hoping that you explained that well, because yes, that is something they did. Again, you have to explain how they were involved in another economic development. Let's read through some of the full responses. Oh, Mrs. W is here. Um, okay, for part A, monopolies started. How do you put the prey? Monopolies started popping up. Oil, railroad, steels were being monopolized. They would do vertical and horizontal integration. Vertical integration is when they're slashing their competitors, I think, and horizontal is when they are absorbing their competitors. My teacher did not go over this. Okay. So the key idea with vertical integration is basically you're going to encompass all the operations required for like the whole process. So for example, if you are going to be like focused on steel, you want to take over, you want to have some kind of influence or a hold on all like such operations that are necessary to make steel in the first place. Horizontal integration is it's a piece of work. Basically, yes, it's basically a way of dealing with competition through a variety of means to eliminate competition. Standard Oil does this a lot, and we will get to that. Seems that a lot of you guys wanted to talk about monopolies, which is valid, yes. But we didn't quite get to that in depth. I will clarify the whole vertical and horizontal integration and give you some examples of that later on. But I see where you're going. I see where you're aiming for, what you're aiming for. So for B, you said one technological development was the creation of railroads. People were now able to reach other states, cities within a shorter amount of time. Businesses were able to flourish from it since goods were being transported quicker and safer. Okay. Um, Railroads started off in Unit 4, which is 1800 to 1848. I'm assuming you are talking about the actual like establishment of like spanning like railroad networks. In that case, then I think that you would explain that if you explained this a little bit without the little reach to other states, cities, that would have been easier to read. Businesses were able to because goods were I would be a bit more specific with what kinds of businesses and industries and markets would benefit from those kinds of railroads, because this is a little bit vague. But then again, it does say briefly describe one technological development. So there is that. Um, Technically, I don't think you would really you would be like crossing a pretty fine line um, with that. And whether or not you would get the point. Because you're kind of diving into economic development in some ways, and you're kind of this is kind of detracting from the focus on technological developments, right? But yes, a railroad would be could the railroad networks that could be something you could talk about. Specifically, the completion of a series of transcontinental railroads. Let's move on to see immigrants from China started to come over to the U.S. They would pay people to ship them to here. They would do mining and train building jobs. I completely forgot about another group. My bad. Okay, so this doesn't really talk a lot about economic change per se. Um, I mean, you also didn't bring up a second group, so there's that issue. Um, what would you like to explain where you wanted to go with this? Um, in respect to like the immigrants, um, were you thinking about like talking about the? Look, I was eating an egg roll. Oh, fair enough, but still. Um, hmm. I will explain part C. Like one way we could explain part C later. Let's see if anyone else got another full response to this. The government was involved in economic development. You would have to specify this other economic development by creating more westward settlements, and not quite by encouraging westward expansion. Yes, that's what they did. They forcibly moved natives, which led to mining companies moving west and people. I'm eating an egg roll. Bear with me. Um, Indian Removal Act is gonna be 1830. The whole Trail of Tears thing. That's Jackson's era. That's his whole thing. With Native Americans and westward expansion. Um, Mining companies. I to be perfectly honest, this doesn't really explain how mining companies will move west. Um, you'd have to also specify what the government did, for these economic developments. So let's see if anyone else had a response on this. I did not cook on C. It's okay, Floof. Sharecropping was an economic development in the South since slavery was banned and previously freed slaves did not have any land and needed money. Oh yeah, this is right after the Civil War. So yes, the rise of sharecropping systems. You would have to describe the sharecropping itself. Um, so hopefully you know what the sharecropping system is. I already explained it to you in discussing the New South. Uh, I I don't think this would necessarily earn the point easily. Again, you're probably walking a fine line with this because you're not really focusing on what is sharecropping. You're just describing, oh, slavery was banned. Again, you're kind of explaining, you're focusing on, oh, why sharecropping exists, but you're not explaining the actual development itself. Describe one technological. Hey, look, it's the Bessemer process. Um, a technological development that made steel production more efficient and affordable, creating a material used in construction, manufacturing, and infrastructure. Steel already existed. It made it. It just made construction and infrastructure. Well, construction and infrastructure. In some ways, you could just put them in the same group. But the key idea is explaining that construction was easier, made easier than it was before because of this whole Bessemer process thing. But also, again, I guess you kind of described this a little bit better than part A, so that there's that improvement. But then again, the thing with these describe task verbs is I'm looking for you guys to be able to describe these developments, not explain them in terms of their effects per se. Because you need to show me that I can be confident that you guys know what you're talking about. But from this part, it seems that you have a good idea, maybe not so perfect. Because you're saying creating a material again, that is not true. Because it did exist before the whole steel thing. Part C. Industrial workers and agriculture workers had a difference in response when it came to unionization, as industrial workers formed unions to advocate for better conditions. Meanwhile, many agricultural workers in the South, you should specify kind of sharecroppers and tenants in the South at the beginning, because I thought you were talking about farmers as a whole in the West. Uh, Meanwhile, many agricultors face cycles of death and struggle to organize efficiently. Um, eh, it's not really what I was looking for. I was looking for labor unions from industrial side things, but also farmer organizations. You know, the Grange, if that's even how you pronounce it, the farmers alliances, all that. Both of them responded to economic change in similar ways, right? Advocating for their benefits. The best one to create steel, as in the effective methodology, not that invented steel. In that case, creating a material. I guess. Hold on, let me reread this again. Make sure that I'm not missing the development that made it. Creating a material used in production. You know, you could read it that way. I think that also. I mean, I don't think that key detail is going to make you like be the deal breaker for the point. I think you described it quite well. Well, not quite well, but you did describe it. You did demonstrate an understanding of it, which is what I'm only looking for. Um, Again, I like to be a little bit more. I did not low. Yeah. The thing is with these with the responses with the SAQs, make our lives easier on part for the graders, because sometimes they don't sometimes like they just don't understand and they want to try to understand. But you gotta make things easier for them. You gotta make it clear. So that creating part did create some confusion. Same thing with this first sentence here. Yeah. The first sentence here, in part C, would also be a bit unclear if you didn't specify the South particularly. Part D, the railroad system expanding was an economic as the government started funding and supporting railroad construction, providing grants. The railroad system itself connected the East and West Coast, furthering trade and transportation of goods. Did not cook on part C. Oh, I see why. Okay, part D, involved in another economic development. You did specify land grants in respect to the railroad system. Um, uh, I mean, the way you set up your response is not great. Um, I think it would have been better to start off with the kind of impact the railroad system had, and then move on to explain that the government had a role in that entire thing. Um, you could also like specifically mention specific legislation such as the Pacific Railroads Acts, which again part of that is land grants and as well as subsidies. Um, yeah, improvement of this you need to make is like in general your improvement with these responses, make it more clear, easier to read and to understand. And that's mainly up to either like your choice of words or the way you kind of set up your responses in terms of like the ordering of like the organization of your thoughts. All right, are there any questions on this SAQ? By the way, if you were wondering what I changed from the 2024 FRQ, I removed part C because that was 1900 to 1945, which is not in the time period we're focusing on. So, um, I think it's from the first set of FRQs. So if you do want to take a look at it, feel free to do so in your own time. Yes, be explicit. All right. Are there any other questions before we move on to The stuff that before we move on and finish off with capitalism and labor, they go like they go like cheese and wine apparently. Well, at least in terms of developments. I'll wait for Leo to finish their thoughts, and then we'll move on to the fun parts. If you write a detail that's wrong, will it axe the entire point, or does it depend on how important the detail is? I am not an AP grader, so I'll defer that to Mrs. W. Both, I guess. So yeah, I'm assuming like if the detail is like really important for your argument and it's wrong, then well your whole argument falls apart. If it's something that minor, don't really care, but if it's integral to your argument, yeah, there's that. Usually the way my AP World teacher used to do it was like, wrong detail, no point. So yeah. All right. Let me just make sure. Okay. So let's talk about my clearly favorite topic. Let me just make sure everyone was typing. Oh, it was Mrs. W. The rise of industrial capitalism. This is gonna be fun, guys. So, what do you gotta know? Well, you gotta know that we got monopolies, but specifically what? How did this whole thing happen? I already mentioned before, earlier, we have land grants and subsidies that will lead to the rise of railroad networks. But with all this also comes a side effect of consolidation at a very rapid rate, forming trusts, putting operations into, under those trusts. So we mentioned vertical integration and horizontal integration. So yeah, let's talk about vertical. And I think Mrs. W actually explained what vertical integration was. Yes, vertical is Disney. They control the movie making start to finish. That's a good explanation. Yeah. So basically, the key idea with vertical integration is that the trust will control all the operations that will lead up to a finished product that they're mainly concerned with. A good example will be Carnegie Steel. Andrew Carnegie. Scottish immigrant. Now, horizontal integration is in some ways brutal. It will, yes, like oil refinery, they will control one level of the refinery, and they control everything at that level. They want to eliminate competition. And that's what Standard Oil is going to do under Rockefeller. Another kind of form of consolidation that you would also kind of want to talk about will be under J.P. Morgan & Co. He will be involved with railroads with some extent. I can't speak today. So yeah, those three are a few examples, but we will have a bunch of business leaders doing this. So don't think that it's just these three guys doing it, right? I also didn't mention Vanderbilt. I didn't mention Levi Strauss. Those people are also mentioned in the CED as well. But those are three Carnegie and Rockefeller are the two illustrious examples, but if you want another example that you're curious about, Morgan & Co. In addition, with these kind of huge trusts, we're going to see kind of changes in the way that marketing and management are going to be done. For example, in the side of management, we're going to see strict in times routines in factory jobs. That's pretty much the key idea. So at the same time, you're going to be subject to very hard working conditions. You're going to also be working with lower wages. And we'll talk about how that leads up to the labor movement later. Another thing about marketing is, mail order catalogs. Basically, things like, the Sears and Roebuck and Co. thing I included, which is a catalog, would be given or handed out in rural areas. Key idea is that we were kind of connecting rural and urban areas in economic ways. So we are kind of setting up the idea that we are building a national economy, right? We're going to see the rise of national corporations and even multinational corporations as well in this era. Another thing you can also talk about railroads and communications. The transportation such as railroads and communications such as the telephone and the phonograph will have some influence in marketing. However, they're not going to be the most integral thing until a little bit later on, with it's going to be Unit 7. You'll find out that a lot of things will move on to Unit 7 because it's just well connected. Finally, on this slide, laissez-faire. What is it? Well, it has to do with a good old friend, Adam Smith. Hopefully you remember Adam Smith. We mentioned his, work, The Wealth of Nations, far back into, I think it was Unit 2? Yes, it should have been Unit 2. Well, it's going to follow pretty similar principles. They don't, proponents of laissez-faire are going to say, hey, let's not have any government interference because this is going to upset the economy by a whole lot. In addition, this will come alongside with the idea of social Darwinism, the idea that economic success will occur by natural selection, which is kind of a BS argument. Both of these, laissez-faire and social Darwinism, are going to be ways that industrialists will justify low wages, poor conditions, and limited regulation on part of the government. And if you're curious where the term laissez-faire comes from, it literally means leave to do in French. Mood, the robber barons, yes. Yes, this period will be characterized by those robber barons. Any questions so far? Because we're still not done with the rise of industrial capitalism. Apparently. Looks like we don't have any more questions from that, so hopefully, I included a picture of these kind of things, refineries, the Cary Furnace, which is at Homestead Steelworks, we'll mention that later, and also the Standard Oil Refinery in Cleveland. Again, you'll see, not quite good for the environment, but we don't care about the environment at this time, right? Anyways, so this first bullet point here is actually kind of a rather hold on, give me a second, I need to turn on the light. Me using the electricity that we'd mentioned in technological innovations. Anyways, this first bullet point is rather odd because it's a very vague thing that College Board highlights in their CED. So I tried my best to make something out of it. Basically, we will see American businesses doing their thing outside of the U.S. For example, we are going to see their influence in Hawaii, such as the Big Five. Castle and Cook, Alexander Baldwin, Seabrew & Co., Theo H. Davis & Co., and Amfac. Do you need to memorize any of those? No, just know that they had a presence in Hawaii, quite significant enough to the point where, they're going to be one of the main proponents for that whole coup in Hawaii, which we'll learn about in Unit 7. All roads lead to Unit 7 in this unit. We will also see Navassa, the rise of the Navassa phosphate mining in, Navassa Island. Basically, the whole thing going on with this company is they're going to mine guano for the purpose of phosphates in them. That's about it. That's all they really want you to know for some reason. But also, it might be worth mentioning that we also kind of had a role with Latin America. We will see the United Fruit Company. This is also in Unit 7 technically, but again, it is a good example. We also see mining industries, mining companies from America also having their whole thing in Mexico. We will also see oil, such as Standard Oil, in Mexico. Actually, part of this is under Porfirio Diaz. So there's that. Now, finally, I want to mention government responses to kind of these whole consolidation and rise of this capitalism stuff. I want to specifically bring up two things that the government did in this time period. We'll talk about all of the things that Teddy Roosevelt and Howard Taft will do in Unit 7. But at this point in time, we're going to see the establishment of the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887. that will follow the Interstate Commerce Act. Hopefully you guys know what the Interstate Commerce Commission does. Basically, they regulate interstate commerce, specifically aimed at railroads, but they also, just in the general, they encompassed interstate commerce, anything that involved any kind of exchange or commercial activity between states. That's what interstate commerce is. Another thing that is worth mentioning is the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. It's not going to lead to immediate, any kind of immediate or significant trust busting, but do know that this is kind of a way that the government tried to impede the rise of monopolistic behaviors. Some ways it did succeed, in other ways, not immediately. So take that as you will. Any questions about this? Yes, the U.S. stole Hawaii. About the rise of industrial capitalism. About monopolies. About businesses. Of course, this is a bit of an oversimplification because I don't have 18 class periods to talk about this. Or the unit as a whole. I'm sorry. Are we good so far? I am getting no feedback, so... Okay. Alright, now I'm getting feedback. Alright, let's move on to the last topic, which is labor. Yay! So, before we talk about the things you might already know about labor, aka labor unions, and kind of the... When I say labor battles, they're not straight up, physical battles, but regarding strikes, which did, I guess, in some ways lend to actual physical fights. But before that, let's talk about the character of our industrial workforce. It's going to be quite diverse. Why? We get a lot of immigrants. And I know I'm mentioning immigrants every now and then. We will talk about it tomorrow in 6.8 and 6.9. Please be patient. But do you know, the huge influx of immigrants will lead to the growth of cities. And we will have kind of a diverse labor force. Where are these immigrants going to come from? Well, Europe, as well as Asia, in this time period. I already mentioned the role of immigrants in labor in Unit 4, that being the Irish and the Germans. Mainly the Irish because they took up more factory jobs in the north. But also, at the same time, we're going to see declining prices, which is kind of a good thing because that also means growing real wages. That means improved standards for select group of people. Not everyone had improved standards. But as a whole, people could generally afford some things that were formerly considered luxuries. Again, growing wages and declining prices of those things due to industrialism. But another thing I do want to mention is that, industrialism did have this key unethical thing, and that's child labor. 1 in 5 American children worked. They worked 6 hours a day, and they also had worse wages than adults. What did they work as? Well, they worked in textile mills, and if you want to put a child in a textile mill, you must be an insane person, because that is prone to injuries. They also worked in agriculture as well, which is not something that children should be doing either. As far as urban children goes, they worked as newspaper boys. They also worked as scavengers. They also did shoe shinings, little menial tasks. And the key effects of these things, I already mentioned injuries. This also led to chronic illness, and don't forget the mines. Yes, mines. That came up in my mind. There's also mines, children in the mines, probably the most brought up thing about child labor. That will also lead to chronic illnesses that will impede their growth. A lot of health, risks that we're forcing children into. You can see why I feel a little bit strongly about this unit. In response to kind of this child labor stuff, as well as, the poor working conditions, the low wages, and all that fun stuff, according to the industrialists, we're going to see the establishment of labor unions. The first labor union that College Board does mention explicitly are the Knights of Labor, which will be established in 1869. and they are going to pretty much try to get negotiations with business leaders. They are going to try to get 8-hour workdays. They're going to try to eliminate child and convict labor. Do remember about the convict labor. This is a side effect of the 13th Amendment, that one specific clause. Knights of Labor was also rather diverse. They included a variety of workers. If you were an unskilled worker, hey, you can be in the Knights of Labor. If you were a skilled labor, you could still be in the Knights of Labor. It also didn't matter whether or not you were an African American or you were a woman, all that fun stuff. All those people were welcome in the Knights of Labor. However, the Knights of Labor will collapse at one point due to the Haymarket Square riots in 1886. If you want to know more details about it, basically, anarchists, bomb goes off, accuse Knights of Labor, convict them, collapse. That's a very gross oversimplification, but there's that. Now, the collapse of the Knights of Labor will also lead to the rise of another labor union, the American Federation of Labor, AFL, and this is mainly going to consist of skilled workers and craft unions. Another key issue about the Knights of Labor, aside from that Haymarket Square ordeal, some business leaders could just literally replace unskilled workers. It was the skilled workers that proved to be more valuable to business leaders, which is why, the AFL is going to be a little bit more effective. But I do want to mention, it's worth mentioning, in this specific time frame, 1865 to 1898, we are not going to see a whole, too much progress made by these labor unions. But it is worth mentioning that they will grow to a very sizable numbers compared to the labor unions that we see in Unit 4 during the Market Revolution. Let's talk about the battles they fought. Strikes. That's what labor unions do in order to get these negotiations to work. Why? If you don't got anyone going to work, you ain't profiting. Which is kind of also another reason why people will do like kind of strikes or boycotts on schools to impact them economically and financially. So key examples of these kind of strikes. We'll see the Homestead Strike in 1892 and the Pullman Strike in 1894. Those are pretty much the most important strikes that you should know. They will both be organized by labor unions, no duh. But the key thing is that, they are going to be fought against by business leaders through either private agencies such as the Pinkertons. We'll call them strike busters. And you'll also have the role of the state government and the federal government being used against these unions. For example, in the Homestead Strike, which was a strike at Homestead Steelworks, which was involved with Carnegie Steel, we will hire Pinkertons, the Pinkerton Agency, to strike bust. That will kind of fail, so we will call in the Pennsylvania Militia to put down these strikes. This will be an example of a state government siding with business leaders against unions. In the case of the Pullman Strike, if you don't know what Pullman was all about, is basically the cars, rail cars. That was the whole thing with Pullman. They will put U.S. mail on these cars. And they're going to talk to the federal government and say, hey, there's U.S. mail. These guys are disrupting U.S. mail. And the federal government will go in and, they will order an injunction. I think that's what it's, yes, an injunction on the unions. And that will effectively, break the strike. And the Supreme Court will also end up upholding this order as well. Any questions about labor so far in the Gilded Age? Weren't labor unions seen as hardcore liberals? Oh, hell yeah! In the sense of economic liberals, no. They were not a fan of economic liberalism. But labor unions will follow a little bit more of a liberal idea, at least in the context of modern liberalism. What was that? The hell yeah? Oh, hell yeah! Hell yeah, they are going to... not necessarily. They will subscribe to the socialist ideas, that kind of political philosophy, kind of the same thing as the Marxism, which is different from communism. I want to make that clear. socialism and Marxism is not the exact same as communism. Please don't make that. Please don't say that because you know, that's actually going to be one of the things that might genuinely kill your AP score. You have to make that distinction. They're not the exact same. Yes, the Knights of Labor, they will accept people other than Chinese immigrants. I think that's mentioned in the, yes, that was mentioned in my notes for 6.9. Is communism not based on Marxist thought? Yes, but that doesn't mean Marxism is communism. It's like kind of a tier kind of thing. So strikes will take a violent turn at the Homestead strike, because that will lead to some fights, like actual physical fights between strike breakers and the unionists. In the case of the Pullman strike, it's not going to be necessarily bloody, but it is going to involve the federal government. So basically, the takeaway is, well, unions don't have a lot going for them. That's a big problem for them. That's why they don't really make too much headway in this era, because of all this. Yes, they would shoot at each other, yes. I mean, the Haymarket Square thing, that was actually a form of protest organized by labor unions. That's going to turn violent as well. So, yeah, some of these strikes will turn violent. Not every strike is going to... Yes, Pinkertons will be hired quite frequently in this period. Not every strike is going to be violent. They will be put down in some ways. Literally, Red Dead Redemption 2. Slightly different Pinkertons. Yeah, they're basically mercenaries. Now, were they able to do their job in the Homestead strike? No, not really. But yeah. Any more questions? Because we're going to get to the super fun stuff. The LEQ. No! Too bad! You're doing an LEQ. Not fully, though. It's the same way. Right. Here's what we're doing. We are going to evaluate the relative importance of causes of the rise of industrial capitalism in the U.S. in this period. What you are going to do is you're going to effectively write a full intro paragraph that will be mainly your contextualization and your thesis. Then what you're going to do, you're going to pick 2 to 4 pieces of evidence that you are going to use if you are going to actually respond to this LEQ. And you're going to write how they would support your thesis. But I don't want you to write them as full body paragraphs, because you just don't have time for that. You will have 20 minutes to do this. So we're going to reach 6:50. When 6:57 rolls around, we are done. I am going to look through them. I'm not going to provide live feedback because I don't want to go over time unless you guys want me to. Then I will. But I don't really want to because I also need to eat dinner. So there's that. If you finish early and you want feedback earlier, you can post it earlier. All right? You have 20 minutes to do this. The clock starts now. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer them. Someone left because of that. Questions relevant to the LEQs. No, I did not get my wisdom teeth, by the way. Pulled out. it was pinged. Let's go as ping. Like one person left because of the LEQ. Interesting. Are you guys holding up with coming up with a thesis? Cool. All right. I am EP. Yes, I am still recording. Hmm. We are 10 minutes halfway through. We haven't really talked about political machines. That will be in the last. I think it's in the last topic. Should be in the last topic. Um, but you can use anything from this unit or anything relevant to address this prompt. At one point, I think I did mention political machines in Unit 4, though. There are people who are joining at the end of this lecture. You've reached the end of the lecture, which is the LEQ. So, almost 5 minutes left. A little bit over. Mm. Some responses. You tried? It's okay. Fortunately, I cannot give really in-depth feedback because we are running out of time. So I have to do a quick glance through and just give my overall feedback from that. Oh, then you might not want to attend the exam tips session then. All right. 4 minutes left. 3 minutes, actually. For the last two people, you have 3 minutes left. So, post through, post your responses, soon. Oh, you just did yours on paper. That's not gonna be. That is not gonna be convenient. So, let me start giving my general feedback instead. Rimu, you are talking about specific evidence, but I'm not really getting a thesis that addresses the prompt directly. Um, so there's that. That's my general feedback. For outdated, I feel like you are being really focused on the New South. When the question is asking about the U.S. as a whole, industrial capitalism. So like the rise of, trusts and monopolies and stuff like that. That was something the prompt was trying to address. We have 1 minute left, so silly alert. I'm assuming you are going to post your response soon. Obsessor, it's fine. The issue is I can't read through your thing to give you some general feedback. If that's fine with you. Why are there more people joining at like the last few minutes of this lecture? All right. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. That's what I'm doing. Oh. Well, the vibes are going to be here for like 3 minutes. So maybe a little longer, but still, I'm ending this as soon as I can. Is this class hard? I don't know, guys. Do you guys think this class is hard? I can't talk. Yes, I've been doing this since Friday. Could be worse. I could be doing this for 4 hours, but I don't think I want to do that. Okay, it's 6:57. Silly alert. Where's your response? 5:30. Step bio review. Yeah, that is true. There it is. Okay, your intro. Yeah, okay. Your contextualization is a little whack, to put it lightly. Your contextualization isn't really focused. Um, it's not specific either. Um, so there's that. What else? It's fine. Um, you did bring up interchangeable parts. You brought up electricity, factory time. Uh huh. The telegraph, the whole transcontinental railroad. Those are good pieces of evidence to talk about the rise of industrial capitalism. Oh, I think if we had unit 7 through 8. Well, you are going to be getting that uh, on Monday and Sunday and Monday again. So yeah. Anyways, so it looks like this LAQ was a little hard. The reason why I picked this is actually because this one key thing with the relative importance of causes, because this is something that I haven't really seen before. As it turns out, it was not too long ago. So yeah, I wanted to put this in. My voice is like reverberating in your ears. No, I am literally standing right behind you. You're hearing both me in person, and I'm kidding. That was really weird to put on the recording. That was a joke. So any last minute questions? Here's the lecture feedback. I know this was a little bit whack, mainly because this is a hard thing to lecture on, and also Mrs. W was in the chat, so that kind of distracted me, since that didn't expect to have an AP teacher in there. Can we do a Kahoot on the last day? Last day of exam, last day of talking and yapping is going to be officially on content. Is going to be Tuesday, I believe, which is unit 9. Um, if the 5% rule in Unit 7 and Unit 6, I don't know what you are referring to. The last lecture on content. Oh, the European immigration limit. That should be Unit 7. I believe that was implemented in Unit 7. Um, or GimKit. Okay. The last day I was gonna say is Unit 9, which is on a Tuesday. It says present. I would say probably 2010. Stop like at the end of Obama, like stop when Obama leaves office. So stop before the first Trump administration. But it's not going to reach 2010 on the actual exams. Stop when we have iPhones. Yeah, stop before things were weird. That's my general rule of thumb. You don't need to know too much about Unit 9. All you need to know is about Reagan and conservatism. And you also need to know about the end of the Cold War. I think those two topics from Unit 9 are going to probably be more important than the rest. Now, does that mean the rest isn't interesting? No, it's kind of interesting because it's like, modern. But also, I'm a little afraid of touching that as a lecturer. So there's also that. Whether or not I will do a Kahoot at the end of that, because that's going to probably be the shortest lecture ever. I think it's like 5 topics right now. We could try doing that, but I don't know. I don't know if I have time to like do a Kahoot thing for fun with you guys. I've got homework to do, so. And then also I have to be prepping for Unit 8 throughout, and that unit is a beast because it's going to be on the AP exam for sure, and I want to make sure that that's also well done and well treated. Same thing for Unit 7. So we'll see how the Kahoot goes. There's a chance that we might not get around to doing it for this season because we're getting a little close to the AP exam. I don't really have a lot of time. The last day is not going to be this Tuesday. It should be. Hold on. No, it will not be this Tuesday. It will be next Tuesday. It will be the Tuesday before May 9th. That will be the last lecture on content. Go play the Roblox A-Push game if you want a review game. Yeah. And also a benefit with that is doing it in your own time. Go ask the A-Push channel. Someone in there has the link. There is one, yes. I think they also have one for AP World and AP Gov. For some of the AP Social Studies. But the actual officially, before the actual like last thing that where I'll be yapping about stuff related to the A-Push exam will be exam tips. And I don't think that has a place. I don't think Kahoot has a place for that kind of thing. Basically, tips for how to deal with MCQs and the FRQs, as well as chilling out, because you guys don't seem to be able to do that. You guys have to be relaxed on the AP exam. You can't. You just can't. So yeah. Are the MCQs in chronological order or mixed? From what I remember, I'm pretty sure they are chronological order. So they will start from like Unit 2. Usually Unit 1 is not tested, but if there is a Unit 1, there'll be like Unit 1 there. And then you'll go all the way to Unit 8. And if they do feel like putting in Unit 9, there will be like a question or two on Unit 9. Alright, yeah. It can be a mixture of both. Yeah, I have pretty bad memory regarding the actual exam itself, but not the content, which is hilarious. No, it isn't. It's not funny because I want to be helpful in that aspect, like telling you guys what the exam is like in terms of formatting. But that shouldn't really matter if whether or not the MCQs are ordered in a particular way or just, random, because you guys should be able to answer them well if you understand the content, all the key things outlined in the CED. The New Deal cannot save you now because there is no FDR in the presidency. That is a fair. That is fair. Yes, Mrs. W is an AP teacher, and I am not an AP teacher, so which is inherently obvious. Um, okay. Aside from that, any more questions? Yeah, she is an AP teacher. She teaches World and AP Human. Um, I mean, it's in her username. And it's one of her roles. Verified. You have to be verified. To get that role as well. Anyways, any other questions about the exam, about the content? Don't ask me what I did for homework because I have yet to do my math homework. Mood. Um, anything? Hard mood. Listen, I spend so much time doing this that I just feel like procrastinating on math. It's not a good. I find my math homework too. It's also musicianship. I have to do math and musicianship. Musicianship is not bad, but math, I gotta thunk. I gotta think. Uh, that's what really math is just thinking hard about things. All right. Any questions about A push? I know that was like a little misheard thong. Oh, get your mind. Get your. I don't know where your mind is. No. No. A push is actually not. Yeah, I don't know where your mind is. I don't know why I'm going. I don't. What? I don't know anymore at this point. Okay. Before I go, are there actually any last minute questions? Because I do feel like going to eat dinner. It is 7, and I don't want to eat lunch. I mean, dinner late. That was a major brain fart. Go eat dinner. All right, we're done. We're done here. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming and sticking it through. It's not easy sitting through 2-hour lectures. I've been there. It's not easy doing it either. As a reminder, tomorrow's going to be our part 2. Tomorrow will be our part 2 of Unit 6. We'll be finishing it up. Mrs. W's been doing a lot of work recently. So yeah, tomorrow will be part 2. We'll be at the same time, 5 p.m. Pacific time. In that case, that would be 8 p.m. for some of you guys. Thank you for staying late if you are on the East Coast. Yeah. All right. Have a good one, everyone. I will post the recording as soon as I can. I will also open up the slides tomorrow after the lecture. If you guys are wondering when those slides will be open, they're currently closed off. All right. Awesome. All right. This is the end. Thank you so much. Gotta stop the recording first.